Okay, so I'm going to give a presentation today about a project which was actually a bit of an experiment I did during the pandemic in 2020, 2021. And I already gave this presentation as part of an astrobiology conference a couple of months ago. And I was very surprised that the scientists who are trained as the biologists were pretty horrified by the procedure that some neuroethologists use to record the neural activity of a cockroach and other insects. So this is, I call this a series of experiments, the Metamorphosis, and this one in particular is about an insect, the Periplaneta Americana, which is one of the most widespread insects around the world, and it's commonly known as cockroach. My practice is really based on radio technologies, combining specifically radio technologies with neuroscience. And I've been working with several international radio telescopes over the past 13 years. This one is the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia, where I will be back in October this year. And I'm currently working with the Irbene Radio Telescope in Italy and the Medicina Radio Observatory also in Italy. And my latest project that I just completed a month ago was based at the Square Kilometre Array in the UK. This experiment was also published in 2021 as part of the Leonardo MIT journal, the special issue Chaos and Cosmos, translated into English and Russian. And the title is, of course, borrowed from the renowned short novel by Franz Kafka, published in 1915. And this novel is considered by ethologist Frans de Waal as one of probably the first example in literature where a human speculates about what is it like to be another animal, in this case a cockroach. And if you read the novel, you might have also appreciated how descriptive and realistic the language is, to the point that it really makes you empathize with the insect, human insect. Kafka's tale of a man who wakes to find he has changed into a giant insect still has the power to shock and delight a century after it was first published. Many regard it as the greatest short story in all literary fiction. And there are countless representations of this novel in performing arts, theater, and so on. Also, allegedly, it inspired the movie The Fly by Cronenberg. The reason why the Metamorphosis story resonates strongly today is that it deals with mankind's inbuilt prejudice against the other. People who do not conform to the popular and familiar norm are often vilified as some kind of repulsive animal. Vermin, cockroaches, rats, and numerous other appellations put the victim into a category where he or she no longer merits consideration as human. So in 2015, I was in Tel Aviv for a conference, and I went to visit the lab of Professor Ayali, who is a neuroethologist, and I met also his then PhD students, Daniel Nebel and Tsai David. And my plan was to extend the project I was working on back then, which was about transmitting into space the brain activity of human participants in my project into the realm of other species, starting with insects. So I visited this lab because they are internationally known as a lab which records the neural activity of specifically cockroaches and locusts. So I got two separate recordings from their research, and one from a locust and one from a cockroach. The team specializes on behavior and neural mechanisms of behavior in invertebrates, and specifically insect models, several recent projects engage with biomimetic and bio-inspired technology in relation to insects' modes of locomotion. So essentially, they study the movement of these insects, which is extremely sophisticated and efficient. And they try to apply to micro-robotics and to build objects that can move as efficiently as these insects. So essentially, scientists and technology has a lot to gain from studying the neuroscience of insects. However, the procedures that they use is extremely invasive and really gruesome. So I will read an excerpt from my exchange with one of the scientists I collaborated with. We had an email exchange, and he described how he makes this recording in his research, and really, I think it opens quite a lot of interesting ethical questions. So in 2020, sorry, I have to read this. I transmitted into space the neural activity of a locust using a multidirectional helicoidal antenna based in Italy. And this recording is essentially a 10 minutes recording of the movement of the legs of a locust, which is immersed in a saline solution. Essentially, the insect is cut into several pieces, and these pieces are revived in the saline solution, and they keep moving, somehow repeating the patterns that the insect performed during its life. And the same with the cockroach. So I also obtained a recording of 10 minutes of the mobility of a cockroach, the mobile memory of a cockroach. And for this transmission of the Periplaneta Americana, I collaborated with a radio telescope in Germany called Bochum Radio Observatory. And because of the pandemic, I couldn't be there, but the radio operators took some photos during the actual transmission of the signal. Because my practice is mostly immaterial, so actually radio waves are invisible, and it's more about the performance is more about the knowing that something is happening in real time. So okay, so the metamorphosis, why sending this neural recording into space? For me, this transmitting in general brain activity into space is an interesting practice because it is a way for me to connect the individual with the outer space in a more direct way. So although radio waves are immaterial, they are physical. They're invisible, they're physical. So they actually can extend our mind into space. So it is a form of extended mind thesis representation, if you like. So for me, extending this practice into the field of insect is also a way to amplify the existential experience of these animals in a way that it is recorded pretty much forever in the fabric of the cosmos. So when you transmit a signal into space, it really leaves a permanent signature in the fabric of space. So I find this quite interesting when, it's in relation to these species that have such a poor representation in our culture and stigmatized and used as a symbol for even people and, kind of unpleasant social representation. So I find also really interesting how in language we use these names to talk about certain type of cultural minorities, for example. So the metamorphosis exploits the procedure of transmitting the neural activity of insects into the cosmos to pose the hard questions if subjectivity could be attributed to such living species and how to possibly communicate or even empathize with them. Okay, so this is the, okay, so this leads to just quickly reading the conversation I had with the neuroethologist. And this is also part of this paper I published on Leonardo. In my conversation with Isaac David, it emerged that for his research, he records motor neurons that are involved in the walking motion of cockroaches. This allows him to study the motor output of the central nervous system and the connectivity which underlies it. He first removes a segment of the cockroach's central nervous system and places it on a plate. He then adds dopamine to the solution, which induces locomotion across the segment of the nervous system and records their output from the motor neurons they generate. The idea is to get the endogenous signals from the motor neurons without the interference of the insect's sensorial feedback, brain commands, or mechanical properties of the body. David usually analyzes recording sessions of 10 minutes, but they can last many hours. The nervous system segments used in David's experiments are part of the cockroach's brain, just like the human nerve cord is part of the human brain. David explains, and yes, insects do have a brain in the sense that they have a main head neuropil that performs similar functions like sensory integration and cognitive tasks as vertebrate brains, but yet still different and simpler. Insects, like most invertebrates and all vertebrates, have a central nervous system and a peripheral one. In the decentralized nervous system of insects, these thoracic ganglia, among other functions, drive the legs and wings of the insect in concert with brain-descending commands and sensory feedback that enables a proper reaction to the environment and the current behavioral context. In our conversation, David explains in detail how he records the neural activity. The preparation is totally alive, although, of course, not independent. It rests in a bath of saline with nutrients. It breathes. By it, actually, he means different body parts. It breathes using its original trachea, which was dissected out of the cockroach alongside the nervous system and maintained their opening floating above the saline to enable ventilation. The preparation is stimulated with a neuromodulator that mimics natural neuronal inputs to the system, but that's to induce certain neuronal activities, not to improve its vitality. The preparation can survive for many hours in this situation, up to 8 hours, and probably more if some of the conditions were changed. To my question on whether the insect is alive during the recording, he answers, insects are funny this way. Asking if they are alive brings about a much more complicated answer than one would give if asked about a mammal or a bird. Headless cockroaches can live for 2 weeks and will die from hunger, no mouth to eat, or thirst. They will even walk headless, although they can't determine or maintain a desirable direction because they can't see without eyes. That is part of the reasons neuroscience benefits so much from studying insects. Their behavior is complex, but the underlying nervous system is simpler than that of vertebrates, and the preparations are more robust. David explains that the sound recording sent into space consists of the levator and depressor activity of the two hind legs. The depressor motor neurons stimulate the depressor muscles, which acts during the stance phase of the step cycle to push the leg against the ground, generate propulsion, and support the body load. Levator motor neurons stimulate the levator muscles, which act during the swing phase of the step cycle to lift the leg off the ground and pull the body forward. So the overall sound you hear is both left and right hind coxa trochanter joints alternating. In an intact, freely walking animal, you will hear a similar sound, but faster with greater frequency. The recording is from a completely reduced preparation, a detached segment of the cockroach's central nervous system placed in a saline solution. It is basically a piece of brain in a plate, activated with some drugs to generate what we call fictive locomotion activity. This kind of experiment usually produces a much slower neural activity than it would in an intact animal. The recording from parts of the insect could be interpreted as the sound of its memories, its evolutionary past, and its intrinsic and acquired bodily habits. According to David, this is not just an interpretation, but an actual physical character that partially explains the pattern of neural activity the animal produces. There is actually an issue of memory in neural activity of single neurons and neural structures. The nervous system is plastic and can change to adapt to support new functions, lose functions, and enhance or reduce existing functions. It does that by changing the number and or location of synapses, and by changing the type of number and number of ionic channels on the synapses themselves. However, could the recording also be interpreted as a trace of the insect's subjective past? The insect is alive, but deconstructed into specialized functions. In potential, the cockroach might have a subjective experience of this process. Thus, the dissection of the insect raises questions on the changes in its subjective experience and its sudden metamorphosis into different beings, scattered as new individual, possibly sentient body parts. An aberrant awakening, like in Kafka's novel, inevitably leading to a doomed conclusion. So the sound was actually the sound of the neural recording of the cockroach, which I think is quite, well, kind of disturbing in a way, but it's really, yeah, just I think could be interesting to play later if we can. For some reason, it doesn't, without the amplification of the, yeah. Can I unplug the HDMI cable? Okay. So this is a 4-channel sound. So just minimize.
And also then leave the Zoom and then indeed play the sound just over your lap.
Okay. Oh, why is not closing? Let's escape. Doesn't escape. It's a bit strange. Oh, no. Okay. All right. So I think this is really best played with some headphones because it is quite layered. But I will see what is audible here. Yeah, it's really, can you hear a little bit? It's something cringing.
Maybe you can put your mic close. Put your mic close.
I don't know where the audio output is. Not so good. Yeah. Can I close it?
Yeah.
Yeah, with some headphones, you can actually hear all the different layers of the recording. So, okay, so that's it. So my question is really about how, you know, is it like experimenting on these, for example, insects in this case. It's something that we benefit a lot as humans. In many ways, also because this kind of procedures cannot be performed on humans, of course. So this type of research really benefits humankind. However, how can we, yes, what are the ethical questions that we should take into account, and should we think of insects as also subjective entities, or, you know, considering that their neural activity is actually plastic, like in mammals, for example. So they have some kind of subjective adaptation to the environment. So yeah, how can we, yeah, just what type of ethical questions we should consider when studying insects. Okay.
What did you do with the insect and telescope?
What did I do?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Did you transfer it?
Yes. That was sent into space. Yeah.
And there's the insect sound, this like sonification. So
Yes. Yeah. Of the movement of the legs, which is.
Is that sound audible in the first place, or it has to be translated into audible?
Well, the sound I played was already the sound recording of the. It's already been translated by the scientists because they already translate this neural activity into sound. So this is already part of their day-to-day research. I didn't commission this horrific experiment, of course, but no, it's something that I learned when I went to visit the lab.
So what they try to understand from that sound?
Oh, a lot. In this particular lab, they study especially how insects move because apparently the way they move with these four legs is extremely efficient. So millions of years of evolution allow these insects to really optimize movement. With, so they try to understand how to make sophisticated robots by copying the movement of cockroaches.
It's related to the military?
Possibly.
It sounds like military.
Yeah, of course, they didn't disclose how they use this research, but yeah, for sure there will be some military application. But in general, I know also from neuroscientists who study a human mind, they also benefit a lot from research on other animals, including insects, and so yeah.
The approach of cognitivism as well, not to try to read the mind as a computer.
Exactly.
But also, just to see through the functions and the overall operation of human mind. But if there's any patterns like this, I don't know what kind of interpretation you give to this experience of listening. Yeah,
of course, you cannot understand consciousness through this type of recording because it is limited to the mechanical, it's, and first of all, we don't know what consciousness is or, but it's something which maybe cannot be detected with this EEG, for example, or this type of recording. But the fact that they can already understand, for example, the fact that the neural structure is flexible, it is adaptable, I think that's already an interesting sign. The fact that, these insects actually learn from the environment and they have some type of subjectivity, which is maybe not necessarily self-aware the way it's self-aware for humans, but it doesn't need to be because we simply evolve in a different way. So they don't need that kind of self-awareness that we have. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the same kind of, life drive or kind of right to live, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay.
Giant insects comes from outer space.
Yeah, this is actually, this is really interesting. I told you I presented this with some astrobiologists. So they study potential life in other planets, and for now it's all speculative study research. So when they said, oh, but you didn't need to read this description of how you obtained the recording, I said, but this is a normal in a scientific conference, in a neuroscience conference. This is completely normal, and also they show the pictures, which I didn't. So these biologists were really somehow shocked, and therefore I asked, what would happen if you ever find life on another planet and you can bring it back to Earth, or you can study it on another planet? What would you do? You just, I don't know, cuddle it, or are you going to dissect this insect or whatever you find? And they couldn't answer because this might be, in the far future, something that we might have to deal with. What do we do if we find life on Mars, for example? For sure, it's going to end up on in some lab. Or so yeah, it's potentially, like you were mentioning, also decay. I mean, this is all stuff that is going to extend in the future, also in outer space, and so yeah.
What can be done or achieved by sending out the insect movement signals?
Yeah, for me, yeah, for me it was more like a bit of amplifying the enigmatic quality of this existence of these insects. So everything is so enigmatic for us, for humans, especially when we ask ourselves, what is it like to be something? Like, what is it like to be a cockroach? I mean, I can't think of any really well, let's say in the animal kingdom, probably insects are the most enigmatic we can really, species. So for me, it was just like amplifying this enigma. This really just, we simply don't understand anything about cockroaches or the cosmos. I mean, it's like just bringing together two impossible form of answers. So just that bit of experiment.
Which frequency was it transmitted? Just
Yeah,
frequency or?
Yes, I have it in my presentation. So the first one, the one I did with actually a radio amateur who is a friend of mine in Italy. He has a small antenna, and he used. Yeah, it's like a helicoidal antenna, so it's like one of these spiral thing, and it's multi-directional. So I don't target any planet, or I'm not trying to contact extraterrestrial civilizations. This one was, the frequency is 145, 525 megahertz. 145.525 megahertz.
It's like a TV, no?
I'm not sure exactly, but this one, I don't have the frequency of the Bochum radio observatory. I don't know what type of frequency they use, to be honest, to transmit. This is a satellite dish, so they mostly, I think, yeah. Yeah.
So insects are now radiating.
Yeah, they're walking in the cosmos. They keep moving with these legs very slowly.
When did you send it out?
Almost 2 years ago, so it's very far already. It's almost, I think, 2 light years away. No, almost. I don't know. It's Proxima Centauri, maybe already somewhere. But yeah, if you haven't read the Metamorphosis, it's such a great, such a really contemporary, relevant novel, in my opinion. But take care.